Chapter 36. The Parting of the Ways. Dumbledore stood up. He stared down at Barty Crouch for a moment with disgust on his face. Then he raised his wand once more and flew out of it, ropes that twisted themselves around Barty Crouch, binding him tightly. Turned to Professor McGonagall. Minerva, could I ask you to stand guard here while I take Harry upstairs? Of course, said Professor McGonagall. She looked slightly nauseous, as though she had just watched someone being sick. However, she drew out her wand and pointed it at Barty Crouch. Her hand was quite steady. Severus, Dumbledore turned to Snape. Please tell Madame Pomfrey to come down here. We need to get Alistair Moody into the hospital wing. Then go down into the ground, find Cornelius Fudge and bring him up to his office. He will undoubtedly want to question Crouch himself. Tell him I will be in the hospital wing in half an hour's time if he needs me. Snape nodded silently and swept out of the room. Harry, Dumbledore said gently. Harry got up and swayed again, pain in his leg, which he had not noticed all the time he had been listening to Crouch. Now returned in full measure. He also realized that he was shaking. Dumbledore gripped his arm and helped him out into the dark corridor. I want you to come to my office first, Harry, he said quietly as they headed up the passageway. Cyrus is waiting for us there. Harry nodded. A kind of numbness and a sense of complete unreality were upon him, but he did not care. He was even glad for it. He didn't want to have to think about anything that had happened since he had first touched the Triwizardy Cup. He didn't want to have to examine the memories, fresh and sharp as photographs, which kept flashing across his mind. Mad-Eye Moody inside the trunk, Wormtail slumped on the ground, cradling his thumb on an arm, Voldemort rising from the steaming cauldron, Cedric asking to be returned to his parents. Professor, Harry mumbled, here are Mr. and Mrs. Diggory. They are with Professor Sprout, said Dumbledore. His voice, which had been so calmly throughout the interrogation of Barty Crouch, shook very slightly for the first time. He was head of Cedric's house and knew him best. They had reached the stone's gargoyle. Dumbledore gave the password, it sprung aside, and he and Harry went up the moving spiral staircase to the oak door. Dumbledore pushed it open. Cyrus was standing there. His face was white and gaunt, as it had been when it had escaped Azkaban. In one swift movement, he had crossed the room. Harry, are you all right? I knew it. I knew something like this. What happened? His hand shook as he helped Harry into a chair in front of the desk. What happened? He asked more urgently. Dumbledore began to tell Cyrus everything Barty Crouch had said. Harry was only half listening, so tired every bone in his body was aching. He wanted nothing more than to sit there, undisturbed, for hours and hours until he fell asleep and didn't have to think or feel anymore. There was a soft rush of wings, Fox and Phoenix had left his perch, flown across the office and landed on Harry's knee. Hello, Fox, said Harry quietly. He stroked the Phoenix's beautiful scarlet and gold plumage. Fox blinked peacefully up at him. There was something comforting about his warm weight. Dumbledore stopped talking. He sat down opposite Harry behind his desk. He was looking at Harry, who avoided his eyes. Dumbledore was going to question him. He was going to make Harry relieve everything. I need to know what happened after you touched the fourth key in the maze, Harry, said Dumbledore. Can leave that ill morning, can't we, Dumbledore? Said Cyrus harshly. He had put a hand on Harry's shoulder. Let him have a sleep, let him rest. Harry felt a rush of gratitude towards Sirius. But Dumbledore took no notice of Cyrus' word. He leaned forward toward Harry very unwillingly. Harry raised his head and looked into those blue eyes. If I thought I could help you, Dumbledore said gently, by putting you into the enchanted sleep and allowing you to postpone the moment when you would have to think about what had happened tonight, I will do it, but I know better. Numbing the pain for a while will make it worse when you finally feel it. You have shown bravery beyond anything I could have expected of you. I ask you to demonstrate your courage one more time. I ask you to tell us what happened. The phoenix let out one soft quavering note. It shivered in the air, and Harry felt as though a drop of hot liquid and slipped down his throat into his stomach, warming him and strengthening him. He took a deep breath and began to tell them. As he spoke, vision of everything that had passed that night seemed to rise before his eyes. He saw the sparkling surface of the potion that had revived Voldemort. He saw the Death Eaters appearing between the graves around them. He saw Cedric's body lying on the ground beside the cup. Once or twice Cyrus made a noise as though about to say something, his hand still tight on Harry's shoulder, but Dumbledore raised his hand to stop him. And Harry was glad of this because it was easier to keep going. Now he had started, it was even a relief. He felt almost as though something poisonous were being extracted from him. It was costing him every bit of determination. He had to keep talking, yet he sensed that once he had finished, he would feel better. When Harry told of Wormtail pursing his arm with Gregory, however, Cyrus let out the Weimar declaration, and Dumbledore stood up so quickly that Harry started. Dumbledore walk around the desk and told Harry to stretch his arm. Harry showed them both the place where his ropes were torn and the cut beneath them. He said my blood would make him stronger than if he had used someone else's. Harry told Dumbledore. He said protection my mother left in me, he had have it too. And he was right. He could touch me without hurting himself. Touch my face. For a fleeting instant, Harry thought he was a gleam of something like triumph in Dumbledore's eyes. But next second, Harry was sure he had imagined it. For when Dumbledore had returned to his seat behind the desk, he looked as old, as weary as Harry had ever seen him. Very well, he said, sitting down again. Voldemort has overcome that particular barrier. Harry, continue, please. Harry went on. He explained how Voldemort had emerged from the cauldron and told them all he could remember of Voldemort's speech to the Death Eaters. Then he told how Voldemort had untied him, returned his wand to him, and prepared to duel. But when he reached the part where the golden beam of light had connected his and Voldemort's wand, he found his throat obstructed. He tried to keep talking, but the memories of what had come out of Voldemort's wand were flooding into his mind. He could see Cedric emerging, see the old man, Bertha Jorkins, his father, his mother. He was glad when Cyrus broke the silence. The wand connected, he said, looking from Harry to Dumbledore. Why? Harry looked up at Dumbledore again, on whose face there was a rested look. Priory incantatem, he muttered. His eyes gazed into Harry's, and it was almost as though an invisible beam of understanding shot between them. The reverse spell effect, said Cyrus sharply. Exactly, said Dumbledore. Harry's wand and Voldemort's wand share core. Each of them contained a feather from the tail of the same phoenix. This phoenix, in fact, he added, and he pointed at the scarlet and gold bird, perching peaceful on Harry's knee. My wand's feather came from Fox, Harry said, amazed. Yes, said Dumbledore. Mr. Ollivander wrote to me to tell me you had brought the second wand the moment you left his shop a year ago. So, what happened when a wand met its brother? Said Cyrus. They will not work properly against each other, said Dumbledore. If, however, the owner of the wand forces the wand to do battle, a very rare effect will take place. One of the wand will force the other to regret spell it had performed in reverse. The most recent first and those which preceded. They looked interrogatively at Harry, and Harry nodded, which means, said Dumbledore slowly, his eyes upon Harry's face, that some form of Cedric must have reappeared. Harry nodded again. Did he come back to life? Said Cyrus sharply. No spell can revoke the date, said Dumbledore heavily. All that would have happened is a kind of reverse echo. A shadow of a living Cedric would have emerged from the wand. Am I correct, Harry? He spoke to me, Harry said. He was suddenly shaking again. The ghost Cedric of whatever he was spoke. An echo, said Dumbledore, which returned Cedric's appearance and character. I am guessing other such form appearance, less recent victim of Voldemort's wand. An old man, Harry said, his throat still constricted. Bertha Jorkins and your parents, said Dumbledore quietly. Yes, said Harry. Cyrus' grip on Harry's shoulder was now so tight it was painful. The last murder the wand performed, said Dumbledore, nodding. In reverse order, more would have appeared, of course, had you maintained the connection very well. Harry, these echoes, these shadows, why did they do? Harry described how the figures that had emerged from the wand had prowered the edge of the golden wave, how Voldemort had seemed to fear them, how the shadow of Harry's father had told him what to do, how Cedric had made its final request. This point, Harry found he could not continue. He looked around at Cyrus and saw that he had his face in his hands. Harry suddenly became aware that Fawkes had left his knee. The phoenix had fluttered to the floor. It was resting its beautiful head again. Harry's injured leg and thick beard tears were falling from its eyes onto the wound left by the spider. The pain vanished, the skin mended, his leg was repaired. I will say it again, said Dumbledore as the phoenix rose into the air and resettled itself upon the perch inside the door. You have shown bravery beyond anything I could have expected of you tonight, Harry. You have shown bravery equal to those who died fighting Voldemort at the height of his power. You have shouldered a grown wizard's burden and found yourself equal to it. And you have now given us all that we have a right to expect. You will come with me to the hospital wing. I do not want you to returning to the dormitory tonight. A sleeping potion and some peace. Cyrus, would you like to stay with him? Cyrus nodded and stood up. He transformed back into the great black dog and walked with Harry and Dumbledore out of the office, accompanying them down a flight of stairs to the hospital wing. When Dumbledore pushed open the door, Harry saw Mrs. Weasley, Bill, Ron, and Hermione group around the heartbroken Madame Pomfrey. They appeared to be demanding to know where Harry was and what had happened to him. All of them whipping around as Harry, Dumbledore, and the back dog entered, and Mrs. Weasley let out a kind of muffled scream. Harry, oh Harry. She stared to Harry toward him, but Dumbledore moved between them. Molly, he said, holding up a hand. Please listen to me for a moment. Harry has been through a terrible ordeal tonight. He has just had a relief it from me. He needs now is sleep and peace and quiet. If he would like you all to stay with him, he added, looking around at Ron, Hermione, and Bill too. You may do so, but I do not want you questioning him until he is ready to answer, and certainly not this evening. Mrs. Weasley nodded. She was very white. She rounded on Ron, Hermione, and Bill as though they were being noisy, and hissed, Did you hear? He need quiet. Headmaster, said Madame Pomfrey, starting At the great black dog that was Cyrus, may I ask what? This dog will be remaining with Harry for a while, said Dumbledore simply. I assure you he is extremely well trained. Harry, I will wait while you get into bed. Harry felt an inexpressible sense of gratitude to Dumbledore for asking the others not to question him. It was as though he didn't want them there, but the thought of explaining it all over again, the idea of revealing it one more time, was more than he could stand. I will be back to see you as soon as I have made Judge, Harry said Dumbledore, I would like you to remain here tomorrow until I have spoken to the school. He left. As Madame Pomfrey led Harry to the nearby bed, outside of the real Moody lying motionlessly in bed at the far end of the room, his wooden leg and magical eye were lying on the beside table. Is he okay? Harry asked. He'll be fine, said Madame Pomfrey, giving Harry some pajamas and pulling screen around him. He took off his robe, pulled on the pajamas, and got into bed. Ron, Hermione, Bill, Mrs. Weasley, and the black dog came around the screen and settled themselves in chairs on either side of him. Ron and Hermione were looking at him almost cautionlessly, as though scared of him. I'm all right, he told them, just tired. Mrs. Weasley's eye filled with tears as she smoothed his bed cover unnecessarily. Madame Pomfrey, who had bustled off to her office, returned holding a small bottle of some purple potion and a goblet. You'll need to drink all of this, Harry, she said. It's a potion for dreamless sleep. Harry took the goblet and drank a few mouthfuls. He felt himself becoming drowsy at once. Everything around him became hazy. The lamps around the hospital wing seemed to be winking at him in a friendly way through the screen around his bed. His body felt as though it was sinking deeper into the warmth of the feathered mattress. Before he could finish the potion, before he could say another word, his exhaustion had carried him off to sleep. Harry woke up so warm, so very sleepy, that he didn't open his eyes, wanting to drop off again. The room was still dimly lit. He was sure it was still night time and had a feeling that he couldn't have been asleep very long. Then he heard whispering around him. They'll wake him if they don't shut up. What are they shouting about? Nothing else can have happened, can it? Harry opened his eyes blearily. Someone had removed his glasses. He could see fuzzy outline of Mrs. Weasley and Bill close by. Mrs. Weasley was on her feet. That's first voice, she whispered, and that's Minerva McGonagall's, isn't it? But what are they arguing about? Now Harry could hear them too, people shouting and running toward the hospital wing. Regrettable, but all the same, Minerva, Cornelius Fudge was saying loudly. You should never have brought it inside the castle, yelled Professor McGonagall when Dumbledore found out. Harry heard the hospital door burst open, unnoticed by any of the people around his bed, all of whom were staring at the door as Bill pulled back the screen. Harry sat up and put his glasses back on. Fudge came striding up the ward. Professor McGonagall and Snape were at his heels. Where's Dumbledore? Fudge demanded of Mrs. Weasley. He's not here, said Mrs. Weasley angrily. This is hospital wing, Minister. Don't you think you had better to? The door opened and Dumbledore came sweeping up the ward. What has happened? Said Dumbledore sharply, looking from Fudge to Professor McGonagall. Why are you disturbing these people, Minerva? I am surprised at you. I ask you to stand guard over Barty Crouch. There is no need to stand guard over him any more. Dumbledore, she shrunken the minister had seen to that. Harry had never seen Professor McGonagall lose control like that. There were angry blots of color in her cheeks, and her hands were ballen into fists. She was trembling with fury. When we told Miss Fudge that we had caught the Death Eater responsible for tonight's event, said Snape in a low voice. He seemed to feel his personal safety was in question. He insisted on summoning a Dementor to accompany him into the castle. He brought it up to the office where Barty crouched. I told him, "You would not agree, Dumbledore." Professor McGonagall frowned. I told him you would never allow Dumbledore Dementors to set foot inside the castle. But my dear woman, roared Fudge, who likewise looking angrily than Harry had ever seen him. As Ministry of Magic, it is my decision whether I wish to bring protection with me when interviewing a possible dangerous. But Professor McGonagall's voice drowned Fudge. The moment that thing entered the room, she screamed, pointing at Fudge, trembling all over, swooped down at Crouch, and Harry felt a chill in his stomach as Professor McGonagall struggled to find words to describe what had happened. He did not need her to finish her sentence. He knew what the Dementor must have done. It had administered its fatal kiss to Barty Crouch. It had sucked his soul out through the mouth. He was worse than dead. By all account, he is no loss, blustered Fudge. It seemed to have been responsible for several deaths. But he cannot now give testimony, Cornelius, said Dumbledore. He was staring hard at Fudge as though seeing him plainly for the first time. He cannot give evidence about why he killed those people, why he killed them. Well, that's no mystery, is it? Blustered Fudge. He was a raving lunatic from the what Minerva and Severus have told me. He seemed to have thought he was doing it all on you know whose instruction. Lord Voldemort was giving him instruction, Cornelius, Dumbledore said. Those people, the teachers, were mere byproduct of a plan to restore Voldemort to full strength again. The plan succeeded. Voldemort has been restored to his body. First looked as though someone had just swung a heavy wing on his face, dazed and blinking. He stared back at Dumbledore as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just heard. He began to splutter, still goggling at Dumbledore. You know who returned? Preposterous! Come now, Dumbledore, as Minerva and Severus have doubtless told you, said Dumbledore. We heard Barty Crouch confess under the influence of Veritaserum. He told us how he was smuggled out of Azkaban and how Voldemort, learning of his continued existence from Bata Jorkins, went to free him from his father and use him to capture Harry. The plan worked, I tell you. Crouch had helped Voldemort to return. See here, Dumbledore, said Fudge, and Harry was astonished to see a slight smile dawning in his face. You can't seriously believe that. You know who back. Come now, come now. Certainly, Crouch may have believed himself to be acting upon you know whose order, but to take the word of lunatic like that, Dumbledore. When Harry touched the Triwizardic Cup tonight, he was transported straight to Voldemort, said Dumbledore steadily. He witnessed Lord Voldemort's rebirth. I will explain it all to you if you will step up in my office. Dumbledore glanced around at Harry and saw that he was awake, but shook his head and said, I am afraid I cannot permit you to question Harry tonight. First, curiously smile lingered. He took a glance at Harry, then looked back at Dumbledore and said, You are prepared to take Harry's word on this, are you, Dumbledore? There was a moment's silence when was broken by Cyrus growling. His hackles were raised and he was baring his teeth at first. Certainly, I believe Harry, said Dumbledore. His eyes were blazing now. I heard Crouch's confession, and I heard Harry's account on what happened after he touched the Triwizard Cup. The two stories make sense. They explain everything that has happened since Bertha Jorkins disappeared last summer. Fudge still had that strange smile on his face. Once again he glanced at Harry before answering. You are prepared to believe that Lord Voldemort has returned on the word of the lunatic murderer and a boy who well Fudge shot Harry another look, and Harry suddenly understood. You have been reading Rita's Skeeters, Mr. Fudge, he said quietly. Ron, Hermione, Mrs. Weasley, and Bill all jumped. None of them had realized that Harry was awake. Was added slightly, but a definite and obstinate look came over his face. And if I have, he said, looking at Dumbledore, if I have discovered that you have been keeping certain facts about the boy very quiet, a parcel mouth, yea, and having funny turn all over the places, I assume that you are referring to the pain Harry has been experiencing in his car, said Dumbledore coolly. You admit that he had been having these pains then, said Fudge quietly. Headache, nightmares, possible hallucination. Listen to me, Cornelius, said Dumbledore, taking a step toward Fudge. And once again he seemed to radiate that indefinable sense of power that Harry had felt after Dumbledore had stunned young Crouch. Harry is as sane as you or I. That scar upon his forehead had not added his brain. I believe it hurt when Lord Voldemort is close by or feeling particularly murderous. Fudge had taken half a step back from Dumbledore, but he looked no less stubborn. You'll forgive me, Dumbledore, but I have never heard, of course, first start acting as an alarm bell before. Look, I saw Voldemort come back, Harry shouted. He tried to get out of bed again, but Mrs. Weasley forced him back. I saw the Death Eaters. I can give you their names, Lucius Malfoy. Snape made a sudden movement, but Harry looked at him. Snape's eye flew back to Fudge. Malfoy was cleared, said Fudge, visible affected, a very old family donation to excellent causes. McNair, Harry continued, also cleared, now working for the ministry. Avery note grabbed Powell. You are merely repeating the names of those who were acquitted of being Death Eater 13 years ago. Said Fudge angrily, you could have found those names in old reports of the trials for heaven's sake, Dumbledore. And the boy was full of someone crackpot story at the end of last year too. His tails are getting taller and you're still swallowing them. The boy can talk to Snake Dumbledore and you still think he is truthworthy. You fool, Professor McGonagall cried. Cedric Diggory, Mr. Crouch, these deaths were not the random work of lunatic. I see no evidence to the contrary, shouted Fudge, now matching her anger. His face purpling, it seemed to me that you all are determined to start a panic that will destabilize everything we have worked for these last 13 years. Harry couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had always thought of Fudge as kindly figure, a little bursting, a little pompous, but essentially good-natured. But now a short, hungry wizard stood before him, refusing point blank to accept the prospect of destruction in his comfortable and ordered world. Believe that Voldemort somehow is Voldemort has returned. Dumbledore repeated. If you accept that fact straightway, Fudge, and take the necessary measures, we may still be able to save the situation. The first and most essential step is to remove Azkaban from the control of Dementors. Rosterus shouted Fudge again, remove the Dementor. I had been kicked out of office for suggesting it. Half of us only feel safe in our bed at night because we know the Dementors are standing guard at Azkaban. The rest of us sleep less soundlessly in our bed, Cornelius, knowing that you have put Lord Voldemort's most dangerous supporter in the care of creatures who will join him the instant he asks them, said Dumbledore. I will not remain loyal to you, Fudge. Voldemort can offer them much more scope for their power and their pleasure than you can. The Dementor behind him and his old supporter return to him. You will be hard pressed to stop him regaining the sort of power he had 13 years ago. First was opening and closing his mouth, and no word could express his outrage. The second step you must take, and at once, Dumbledore pressed on, is to send envy to the giants. Envy to the giants first strengthened, finding the tongue again. What madness is this? Extend them. The hand of friendship now before it is too late, said Dumbledore, or Voldemort will pursue them as he did it before, and he alone among wizards will give them their right and their freedom. You cannot be serious, was gasped, shaking his head and retreating further from Dumbledore. If the magical community got wind that I had approached the giants, people hate them, Dumbledore. End of my career. You are blinded, said Dumbledore, his voice rising now, the aura of power around him level, his eyes blazing once more by the love of the office you hold, Cornelius. You place too much importance, and you always have done, on the so-called purity of blood. You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grown to be. Your Dementor had just destroyed the last remaining member of the pure blood family, as old as any, and see what that man chose to make his life. I tell you now, take the step I have suggested, and you will be remembered, in office or out, as one of the bravest and greatest ministers of magic we have ever known fail to act. And history will remember you as the man who stepped aside and allowed Voldemort a second chance to destroy the world we have tried to rebuild. Insane, whispered first, still backing away. Mad, and then there was silence. Madame Pomfrey was standing frozen at the foot of Harry's bed, her hand over her mouth. Mrs. Weasley was still standing over Harry, her hand on his shoulder to prevent him from rising. Bill, Ron, and Hermione were staring at Fudge. If your determination to shut your eyes will carry you as far as this corner is, said Dumbledore, we have reached the parting of the ways. You must act as you see fit, and I shall act as I fit. Dumbledore's voice carried no hint of the threat. It sounded like a mere statement, but Fudge bristled as though Dumbledore were advancing upon him with wand. Now see here, Dumbledore, he said, waving a threatening finger. I have given you free rein. Always, I have had a lot of respect for you. I might not have agreed with some of your decisions, but I have kept quiet. There aren't many who have let you hire werewolf or keep Hagrid or decide what to teach your student without reference to ministry. But if you are going to work against me, the only one against whom I intend to work, said Dumbledore, is Lord Voldemort. If you are against him, then we remain Cornelius on the same side. It seemed Fudge could think of no answer to this. He rocked backward and forward on his small feet for a moment and spun his bowler hat in the hand. Finally, he said with a hint of a plea in his voice, he can't be bad, Dumbledore, he just can't be. Snape strode forward past Dumbledore, pulling up the left sleeve of the robes as he went. He stuck out his forearm and showed it Fudge, who recalled. There, said Snape harshly. There, the dark mark. It is not all clear as it was an hour or so ago when it burned black, but you can still see it. Every Death Eater had the sign burned into him by the Dark Lord. It was a means of disgusting one another and his means of summoning us to him. When he touched the mark of the Death Eater, we were disappeared and apparated instantly at his side. This mark had been growing clearer all year. Carcroft's too. Why do you think Karkov fled tonight? We both felt the mark burn. We both knew he had returned. Karkov feared the Dark Lord's vigilance. He betrayed too many of his fellow Death Eaters to be sure of welcome back into the fold. First step back, Snape too. He was shaking his head. He did not seem to have taken in a word Snape had said. He stared, apparently repelled by the ugly mark on Snape's arm, then looked up at Dumbledore and whispered, I don't know what you and your staff are playing at. Dumbledore, I have heard enough. I have no more to add. I will be in touch with you tomorrow, Dumbledore, to discuss the remaining of school. I must return to ministry. He had almost reached the door when he pushed. He turned around, strode back down the dormitory, and stopped at Harry's bed. "You are winning," he said shortly, taking a large bag of gold out of his pocket and dropping it onto Harry's beside table. 1,000 gallons. There should have been a presentation ceremony, but under the circumstances, he crammed his bowler hat onto his head and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The moment he had disappeared, Dumbledore turned to look at the group around Harry's bed. "There is work to be done," he said. "Molly, I'm right in thinking that I count on you and Arthur." "Of course you can," said Mrs. Weasley. She was white to the lips, but she looked resolved. "We know what fudge is. It's Arthur's fondness for Muggle that had held him back at the ministry all these years. First things, he lacked proper wizarding pride. Then I need to send message to Arthur," said Dumbledore. "All those that we can persuade of the truth must be notified immediately, and he is well placed to contact those at the ministry who are not short journalists." "I'll go to Dad," said Bill, standing up. "I'll go now." "Excellent," said Dumbledore. "Tell him what had happened. Tell him I will be in direct contact with him shortly. You will need to discreet, however, if Fudge thinks I am interfering at the ministry." "Leave it to me," said Bill. He clapped a hand on Harry's shoulder, kissed his mother on the cheek, and pulled on his cloak and strode quickly from the room. "Minerva," said Dumbledore, turning to Professor McGonagall, "I want to see Hagrid in my office as soon as possible. Also, if she will consent to come, Madam Maxim." Professor McGonagall nodded and left without a word. "Poppy," Dumbledore said to Madame Pomfrey, "would you be very kind and go down to Professor Moody's office, where I think you will find a house elf called Winky in the considerable distress. Do what you can for her and take her back to the kitchen. I think Bobby will look after her for us." "Very, very well," said Madame Pomfrey, looking startled, and she too left. Dumbledore made sure that the door was closed and that Madame Pomfrey's footsteps had died away before he spoke again. "And now," he said, "it is time for our number to recognize each other for what they are. Cyrus, if you could resume your usual form." Great Black Dog looked at Dumbledore, then in an instant turned back into man. Mrs. Weasley screamed and leaped back from the bed. "Cyrus Black!" She shrieked, pointing at him. "Mom, shut up, Ronnie, it's okay." Snape had not yelled or jumped backward, but the look on his face was one of mighty fear and horror. "Him?" he sneered, staring at Cyrus, whose face showed equal dislike. "What he is doing here?" "He is here at my invitation," said Dumbledore, looking between them. "As are you, Severus. I trust you both. It is time for you to lay aside your old differences and trust each other." Harry thought Dumbledore was asking for a near miracle. Cyrus and Snape were eyeing each other with the utmost loathing. "I will settle in a short term," said Dumbledore, with a bite of impatience in his voice for a lack of open hostility. "You will shake hands. You are on the same side now. Time, in short, and unless the few of us who know the truth do not stand united, there is no hope for any one of us." Very slowly, but still glaring at each other as though each wished the other nothing but ill, Cyrus and Snape moved toward each other and shook hands. They let go extremely quickly. "That will do to the going on with," said Dumbledore, stepping between them one more. "Now I have work for each of you." Fudge's attitude, though not unexpected, changes everything. "Cyrus, I need you to set off at once. You are to alert Remus Lupin, Arrel Buffy, Mundungus Fletcher, and old crowd. Lie low to Lupin for a while. I will contact you there." "But," said Harry. He wanted Cyrus to stay. He did not want to have to say goodbye again so quickly. You'll see me very soon, Harry, said Cyrus, turning to him. I promise you, but I must do what I can. You understand, don't you? Yes, said Harry. Yeah, of course I do. Cyrus grasped his hand briefly, nodded to Dumbledore, transformed again into the black dog, and ran the length of the room to the door, whose handle to turn and paw. Then he was gone. Severus, said Dumbledore, turning to Snape, you know what I must ask you to do if you are ready. If you are prepared. I am, said Snape. He looked slightly paler than usual, and his cold eyes glittered strangely. Good luck, said Dumbledore, and he watched with the trace of apprehension on his face. As Snape swept wordless after Cyrus, it was several minutes before Dumbledore spoke again. I must go downstairs, he said finally. I must see the degrees. Harry, take the rest of your potion. I will see all of you later. Harry slumped back against the pillow as Dumbledore disappeared. Hermione, Ron, and Mrs. Weasley were all looking at him. None of them spoke for very long. You have got to take the rest for your potion, Harry, Mrs. Weasley said at last, her hand nerve and shake of cold on his beside cabinet as she reached for the bottle and the goblet. You have a good long sleep. Try and think about something else for a while. Think about what you are going to buy with your winning. I don't want that gold, said Harry in an expressionless voice. You have it. Anyone can have it. I shouldn't have won it. It shouldn't have been Cedric's. The thing against which he had been fighting on and off ever since he had come out of the maze was threatening to overpower him. He could feel a burning prickle feeling in his inner corner of his eyes. He blinked and stared up at ceiling. It wasn't your fault, Harry, Mrs. Weasley whispered. I told him to take the cup with me, said Harry. Now the burning feeling was in his throat too. He wished Ron would look away. Mrs. Weasley set the potion down at the beside cabinet, bent down and pulled her arm around Harry. He had no memory of ever being hugged like this, as though by mother. The full weight of everything he had seen that night seemed to fall upon him as Mrs. Weasley held him to her. His mother's face, his father's voice, the sight of Cedric dead on the ground all started spinning in his head until he could hardly bear it, until he was screaming up his face again, the howl of mystery fighting to get out him. There was a loud of slamming noise, and Mrs. Weasley and Harry broke apart. Hermione was standing by the window. She was holding something tight in her hand. Sorry, she whispered. Your potion, Harry, said Mrs. Weasley, quickly wiping her eyes on the back of her hand. Harry drank it on one gulp. The effect was instantaneous. Heavy, irritable wave on dreamless sleep broke over him. He fell back onto his pillow and thought no more. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. Till then, see you. Bye bye.